department does, and they're our co-host for this wonderful program. And then she'll go today.
Thank you, Vanessa. As she said, my name is Helen Dulac, and I'm going to be giving a short presentation because we want to save all of the good stuff for Heather. And I'm basically just going to tell you a little bit about my department. We have all these people joining us, so exciting. There we go. So my name is Helen Dulac. I work for the City of Dallas Environmental Quality and Sustainability, and we are so excited to be partnering with the Dallas Public Library on this Grow With Us series. We have these presentations every Monday at noon, going all the way through the end of August. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my department with you because you've probably never heard of it. That's because we're relatively new. We formed back in 2004, and we were called the Office of Environmental Quality. We worked really, really hard for 4 years, and in 2008, Dallas became the first city in the United States, the first city, not a city in California, not a city in Colorado, not the capital of Texas, but Dallas was the first city to achieve ISO 14001 certification. And what that is a special certification that we earned because we took 14 departments of the city and we looked at everything we did through an environmental lens, from the cars that we use to our processes to the paper that we buy. And we worked on ways to lessen our environmental impact in multiple areas. And every year we get audited by independent auditors to keep that certification. Let's fast forward 10 years to 2018, and a lot of stuff happened to my department. We expanded and doubled in size, and with that, we changed our name. We are now Dallas Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability, or DEQS, and we added some more environmental operations. Also in 2018, we got our own City Council subcommittee. So the Dallas City Council meets every Wednesday, and you can watch those meetings, but on Mondays, the Environment and Sustainability Committee meets. And if you ever watch those meetings, you'll see a lot of my coworkers. Also in 2018, we created a new, robust, combined outreach and education team, which is the best team in my department because I'm on it, and also all my wonderful coworkers. And if you have heard of us, it's probably because just a month ago, the City Council passed the first comprehensive environmental and climate action plan known as CCAP. And this is the first time the City of Dallas has had a climate plan, so we're really excited. And you can see it and read it all in its 200 and something page glory at dallasclimateaction.com. And we're also really proud because there's not many large metropolitan cities not located on the coast that have a climate plan, but Dallas is one of those. So I talked about how our department doubled in size. So you can see that we handle everything environmental from A to Z, everything from air pollution, air quality to zero waste. The green are the new operations we absorbed in 2018. And I want to talk about one of those in a little bit of detail, and that is stormwater management. So stormwater is another name for rain or urban runoff. So when the rains we had like a week ago, or even when your lawn sprinklers go off and that water hits the sidewalks and the driveways, goes down the streets, down the gutters, and into those big drains. And those drains are called storm drain inlets, and they're there to keep the streets from flooding. And they do a great job of removing the water really quickly. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is those storm drain inlets take the rainwater and anything in it to the nearest creek, lake, or eventually the Trinity River. That water does not get cleaned, it does not get treated. So if there's any pollution in it, such as bacteria from pet waste, leaves and grass clippings, extra yard chemicals, all of that stuff that's how it gets into our water bodies. A lot of times that's how litter that you see along the shorelines, it's all washed in from the rain. So we just want to remind everybody about this, and so you can be mindful about what you're doing outside. So if you do have to apply lawn chemicals, you don't over apply. To not litter or to pick up some litter. And after Heather's presentation, she's going to show you a great alternative to lawn chemicals as making your own organic fertilizer with your worm casting. So I mentioned the outreach and engagement team. So what we want to do is empower Dallas to save the earth. And that's a pretty tall order. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that by doing virtual presentations like this and also meeting in person when we're allowed. So you can invite us now or in the future to talk to your HOA, different kinds of clubs and organizations you belong to. We also have a lot of materials for students, anywhere from K to college. We can do virtual presentations like this, seminars. We have a lot of hands-on activities, and we also table at events. We don't always, we also host our own events. Early August, we're going to have Clean Air Action Day. And in October, we have the Waterwise Landscape Tour and the first ever Dallas Youth Climate Symposium. Now, if you invite us to speak, what do we talk about? We do those environmental topics from A to Z, anything from air quality, the climate plan, energy and energy conservation, green living, stormwater, urban agriculture, water conservation, and zero waste. So to invite us out, you can visit our website, greendallas.net, and fill out the event or request form. Also, our website is full of a lot of information and green tips. If you ever have any questions, just email us at greendallas@dallascityhall.com. And of course, please follow us on social media. We are Green Dallas TX on Facebook and at Green Dallas on Twitter and Instagram. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we are going to move on to Heather. And I am so excited to have Heather Rinaldi with us. She is the owner and chief worm wrangler at Texas Worm Ranch. She has had this company for 12 years. She has extensive garden and growing knowledge, and she'll be sharing a lot of that with us today. I know I personally have learned a lot from her, and I'm always excited to hear her speak. So Heather, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Helen. All right, so Vanessa, if you can pull up my screen. We had some technical difficulties, and so Vanessa will be sharing my presentation. But I just want to welcome everybody aboard, and thank you for being part of this. And so, Vanessa, if we can start right there at the top, that would be awesome. So this is actually a very important page because it gives our contact information. And we have a website along with a very active Facebook page. I am always trying to update information about local growing, sustainability, soil health, and obviously worm composting and composting. So join us at Texas Worm Ranch on Facebook. And then finally, if you want to order any of our products or pick up worms, it's really important. We just can't go grab worms from a box and have them available for you. We have to have those harvested from their habitat ahead of time. And so email us a day or two in advance and we'll have those for you. So moving on, what has brought you to this class today? And why in the world would anyone want to compost with worms? And so we're going on to the next screen, Vanessa. And the #1 reason that people want to compost with worms is to reduce their waste, which can be food waste in moderation, all sorts of carbon waste from leaves to cardboard to paper. And all of those things that are household waste can be composted with worms. The second most popular reason is to improve the soil with a wonderful natural amendment. Notice I'm not calling those worm castings a fertilizer. They are an amendment that has much more important ingredients in there than fertilizers. In fact, those wonderful ingredients that are part of worm castings can help reduce fertilizers. And if we use them on our soil ecosystems, our lawns, our gardens, or even our house plants, that would help reduce your need for fertilizer and impacting our stormwater. So we'll talk more about that. Closing the loop. In our family, we eat. We give our food scraps and other scraps in our house to our compost or worm compost, and then we use that in our gardens, and then we eat all over again. So it's really a closed loop cycle. Worm composting is really great for people who have limited outdoor space. In Texas especially, you really want to do worm composting inside. Hot temperatures are going to create dead worms. So we don't want worm soup, so we would do it indoors. And finally, I do have a few people who say, I promised my kid a pet and we can't have anything furry. So I tell my teenagers that the worms are the easiest members of our family. They don't fight with their sister. They don't talk back to their parents. They just quietly, without making any noise or having any issues, clean up all the mess in your family. And they eat all your vegetables. So they're pretty good little pets. So you'll hear me interchanging a couple of terms. One is vermicompost, and that is a natural amendment of mostly finished worm compost. That would be the food waste that you give the worms and the bedding that is in that worm bin. That vermicompost is enriched with a lot of worm poop, and that's called castings, and mucus. As the worm swallows all of the waste in that bin, it is encased in their mucus that goes through their digestive tract. Worms are unique in that they do aerobic digestion. You and I and all the mammals that we know, they do anaerobic digestion. When it goes through the worm's digestive tract, it cleans up and makes it aerobic, and then you have aerobic bacteria, which are not likely to have pathogens. So, you know, your dog waste or even cattle waste or human waste, you might get E. coli. You shouldn't have that issue with worm castings or worm poop. So, moving on. So the biggest benefit of vermicompost, like I suggested, isn't that it is a fertilizer. But what happens when you inoculate your soil, whether it's a field or a garden bed or your flower bed, whatever, is you're not adding fertilizer, you're adding ingredients there that are going to make a difference in your soil profile. So we don't want to see what's going on the left, which would be dead, infertile soil. What we want to see is what we have here on the right, which is organic matter rich, beneficial microbe rich soil, which then attracts deep burrowing earthworms, which are different than composting worms. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. All right, Vanessa. So that what some people would call magic ingredient isn't really magic at all. It is science. Back to good old science, and in this case, microbiology. So every teaspoon of worm castings is going to be full of a just mass of bacteria, beneficial fungi, beneficial protozoa, and beneficial nematodes. Our soil should be alive. If it's not alive, then it is dirt. So dirt is what I would call dead soil, and you're not going to be able to produce very much from that dead soil unless you're throwing a ton of chemical fertilizers on there. So this is how the forest ecosystem or the prairie ecosystem works. Think about it. We never add fertilizer to the forest, yet there is growth at every level. And so that is the role of the microbes. And we can move to the next slide. And the role of those soil microbes are, number one, to enable decomposition. Bacteria consume organic matter. That's anything that was once alive. That can be anything from animal manures to leaves to woody material, anything that would find on the floor. In the state of Washington, they're now allowing human composting when you die. So even we are potential organic matter. But we don't want to think about that. So bacteria are the first step of that, and then other protozoa and nematodes, actually bacteria, and then they release nitrogen and other nutrients in a plant available form. Then fungi, beneficial fungi, pick that up and they hold and store water, nutrients, and minerals and bring those back to the roots of the plant. It also soil and makes that nasty clay soil we have in Dallas. It can convert it from that hard clay into nice, soft, very fertile humus. And then those microbes can help reduce your chance for toxins in your soil, reduce your plant's chance of getting disease, and reduce your pests in your soil lawn ecosystem. So microbes are pretty important, and we want to make sure that compost is good and has a rich density and diversity of those microbial families. I know that ours does at Texas Worm Ranch. They checking to make sure of the biological quality of our castings. So everybody out there in internet land doesn't need to go buy a microscope or get the education behind that. If your plants are producing, if they're green and thriving and healthy, if you have low pest influence, then you can know for pretty well that your vermicompost that you produce is good. So these are plants that actually came from our Texas Worm Ranch gardens. So Vanessa, we can move forward. So the picture on the left is a summer crop Texas Worm Ranch garden ecosystem. And those are okra that are thriving and producing nice. And we use zero fertilizers, whether organic or chemical there. We're simply supporting our system below the surface of the soil with our beneficial microbes. And again, on the right, those are winter crops, Brussels sprouts and Swiss chard. And again, no fertilization whatsoever. It's all managing soil biology and looking at things like it's a prairie or a forest ecosystem and using the best practices from those after inoculating that soil with our Texas Worm Ranch worm casting. So we're ready to start. How do you get started? How do you make your bin? We can load that first video and we will show you how to do that.
All right, Heather, just to make sure I'm going to play the correct video, we're going to play are we playing the one about harvesting or the one about making your bin?
Making your bin.
Okay.
Yes.
Hello, I'm going to show you how to set up your worm bin. We're going to start with pointing out 3 different types of indoor bins. The first one is the self-made Rubbermaid tote type system. The second one is the urban worm bag, which is a really great system that makes really good vermicompost because it stays aerobic. It has a Gore-Tex-like fiber that maintains moisture but allows lots of oxygen to go through that system. The only negative of that system is it's rather large. It has about a 2.5 by 2.5 square foot space. And so that might be large for where you want to keep your bin indoors, like Texas, you would want to keep your bin indoors. The final bin system, very popular, very well marketed, and that is the Worm Factory 360. This is not a bin that I really like because there's not enough oxygen in this system, and when we have customers bring these in, they're always anaerobic, which means they're wet, they're stinky, etc. It is marketed talking about the nozzle down here, and you can pour out worm tea to use on your plants. I never recommend using anaerobic worm tea on plants, but I also don't want you to throw this away. What I recommend is better management of your system. trying to get more oxygen in the system by drilling holes in the sides of these trays and never having that moisture or leachate come out. So let's talk about what we want to put in our system. And it doesn't really matter which one. Composting worms are top dwellers, so we don't want deep material. We want to start with what I would call a forest floor, and that is something like good organic finished compost, about 3 inches deep, 2 to 3 inches deep, because composting worms are not going to burrow past that. So we put that compost in there, and then we're going to add our worms into that system. All right, so we have 1/2 pound of worms. That's what we add into a bin like this. And we would put those guys like this in that system. There's a few of the red wigglers right there. We put that 1/2 pound right there. And then we cover it with what I call a forest leafy layer. We're going to use shredded newspaper for that layer. And you would want to have that moistened about like a damp sponge. And then put that on top of everything. All right, so you would do this whether it's this system, the Rubbermaid tote, or the urban worm bag. And then when you feed, you pull back that leafy layer or the newspaper layer, put a handful of your fruit or vegetable waste there, and cover it back up. So in these systems, you want plenty of oxygen. So you want lots of holes on the sides. We even put holes on the bottom and then put this up on a brick so that you can get oxygen in the bottom of that system. And then finally, you would want to put this in a cool, dark place. You don't want to use a clear bin or have this in a sunny spot. Worms do not like light. So cool, dark spot is where it's at. Keep it under 85 degrees, keep it above freezing, and all will be well. Good luck and happy worm composting.
All right, so Vanessa, if you'll pull up the slides again, please. And so I saw that someone asked, oh, how cool is cool enough? Worms are going to prefer the same temperatures that humans do. They'll thrive in those temperatures. Over 85 degrees, they're probably going to die. So there are many reasons to have your bin indoors. And my hope is to teach you how to do that without impacting the rest of your family. So let's start with what type of worm. There are at least 9,000 different species of earthworms on our planet, and they are broken into 3 different families. One is composting worms, which is what we sell here at Texas Worm Ranch. We prefer red wigglers. They are the ones with the broadest temperature range, and they are just an easy worm to keep alive and keep thriving for any first-time home composter. The second variety is horizontal burrowing worms. These are not native to Texas. However, fishermen have dumped these. They're typically your nightcrawler varieties, and they have dumped these in the forest ecosystems of the Northeast and southern Canada. And they're actually doing quite a bit of damage in those forest ecosystems because they're consuming the leaf layer in those forests too fast. But those are not in Texas. Now in Texas, you will find Alabama jumpers, which are deep burrowing worms, which go in and out of one hole. They may go 2 feet down, which in the middle of summer they would need to do in order to escape our heat and drought. Now, deep burrowing worms have a specific job. They are aerating that soil. Those deep burrowing worms are an indicator species that you have good, healthy soil microbiology. Worms actually eat microbes. That is what they're trying to get from food waste or the material in their bin. And if you don't have those microbes, you don't have a healthy living soil, you will not see worms in your yard or your gardens. But composting worms can only burrow down about 1 to 2 inches. So they are not going to survive outside in your garden or flower bed. So which worms should you put in your yard or garden?
Red wigglers.
No, red wigglers will die. It's going to be, close to 100 degrees this week. They are going to survive. There's not enough organic matter in nearly anyone's soil for those to stay alive. So you also don't want to buy your deep burrowers. If you don't have them, you don't have the ecosystem set for them, and you need to improve your soil health by inoculating with worm castings and then having plenty of organic in on your gardens or mulch on your flower beds, or leaving your grass a little bit longer so that it's not golf course short. You have to have soil cover in order to support your soil microbe ecosystem. All right, moving on. All right, so these are the same systems that I showed you. And as you can see, there are 3 types that I recommend for home composters. And I actually don't like the one with the nozzle because if it's anaerobic and you're draining off liquid from your system, your bin is too wet. So cut back on the food waste, cut back on the, don't add water, and try to maintain what we call Goldilocks moisture, which is kind of like walking through dewy grass. We don't want Louisiana bog in our bins, and we don't want it to be dry either. All right, Vanessa. So this is usually the first thing that people ask. Where can I worm compost? I have a nice shady porch. Well, how long does it take for a plastic bin to heat up to a point that it will kill worms? Probably less than an hour. So I really always recommend that people, especially here in Dallas, we may have a storm blow through that knocks the lid off and everything falls out, or we flood, and so you flood your bin. But usually when people contact me and say all my worms died, the first thing I ask is, oh, is your bin outside? And their answer is, why, yes, how did you know? Well, and those temperatures can really create a problem. Under 85 degrees is what we want to look at. But it's not just the temperatures, it's also pests. Apparently, and I haven't tried this, but apparently worms are in rural areas of Dallas. Feral hogs love them. Skunks and possums and raccoons love them. We even had a ship. The mailman had left the worm box on someone's porch, and their dogs got into the box and ate all the worms. Also, rats and mice love worms. If you try to have an outdoor worm bin and you have it open, well, the Texas cobra might be an issue. And but a lot of people think that all snakes are, just horrible. But some snakes do like. Then you're going to be competing with all these things that like to eat worms. Now, fire ants don't necessarily eat the worms, but they love to get into worms. You put your hand in there and stir up your worm bin, and then they're going to attack everything, worms and you. So I really can't say it enough. Here in Dallas, I recommend for your housemates. All right, Vanessa, if you live and you have have chickens, well, they of course love worms too. And we've had some cases where people had their worm bin in their gardens and the worms were eaten. All right, sorry about the audible, doing our best. So we showed you how to set up. Main things I want to point out here is to layer your layers like a forest ecosystem. There is no composting in nature and worm bins. If you start mixing things, you are going to have, let's make sure we don't do that. Oxygen is very important. Make sure you have enough holes in that system. If you get too much moisture in that, then you're going to have poor casting. Through dewy grass. And then you see those temperature ranges that they prefer, and the temperatures above 85 are probably going. All right, so on our forest floor, I really recommend an organic compost with high organic matter. When you open a bag of organic compost, you want to make sure you smell that smells like ammonia. If it is, it's off-gassing nitrogen, and that could compost, and it is that correct moisture level, and that there's no bad ammonia. You would like peat or cocoa coir. I don't really like that, but bagged soil doesn't have enough organic matter, and potting mix also doesn't. There, having hearing audible issues. I honestly don't know what to do about that. So I apologize for that. Floor layer needs to be our leafy cover layer. It needs to be moistened as well. And that needs to be leaves, paper, cardboard. If you buy straw, you have to make sure it's a verified source that did not get treated with herbicides. Herbicides kill and that is a great reason not to use herbicides on our gardens, our flower beds, or our yards. You're basically killing your soil when you use those herbicides. And good is most fruits and vegetables. In moderation, you can use citrus, garlic, broccoli, or cabbage, but you want to make sure not to overuse those food sources for several reasons. The coffee and tea, along with the grains, can be higher in nitrogen, which can a leaf or two is no big deal, but a big head is going to off-gas, and you can actually kill your worms through off-gassing. Amount that I recommend is about a cup of food waste underneath the leaf of that paper every 3 to 4 days. All right, Vanessa. So we're going to move to the next video, and that is how to harvest.
So this is Heather Rinaldi with Texas Worm Ranch. And our most frequent question is, how do I harvest my worm bin? So I've been doing worm composting for 10 years, and I am going to show you the 3 easiest methods I have found for home worm composters to harvest their worm bins. Let me start by saying, I really recommend that you harvest your worm bins about every 8 to 14 weeks. If you wait too long, those worm castings get really sticky and it feels a bit like mud, and it gets a lot harder to harvest. So if you stick within that 8 to 14 week range, most worm bins are going to be okay for harvesting. So let's start with what I feel is the easiest method. I call that the melon method, and it is not really used to separate castings. It is used if you want to start a new worm bin and you just need some worms to move to that bin. So this easy method, you can use a piece of melon, or like we did here, a piece of pumpkin, and just place that down on the brown surface of your worm bin where you have your compost and the worms, and you lift aside that pumpkin, and that's where you find most of the worms and where they've congregated. So you would just put this pile, move that into your new worm bin. So that's really easy, but it hasn't really separated your worms from all of your castings. So let's show 2 more methods. This is what I call the light method, and it's also easy. Most home worm composters should be able to do this. You gather all the brown material from your bin, worms, castings, and everything else, and put that in a pile. Now we call it the light method because we put it under a good source of light. You would want to wait about 10 or 15 minutes and let the worms who don't like light burrow down away from that. So for this method, I use a very light touch, and I scrape away slowly and lightly the tops and the sides. Okay, so you just move that, and you see we still don't see any worms. Keep scraping. I have a very light touch here. And we get down to a pile, and that's what I call a squirm of worms. So that's a great number to put into your restarted worm bin. All right, so the next method that I have used in the past is the sifter method. And this is a sifter that I have used for many years. It's simply 2x4s with a 1/4-inch hardware screen on the bottom. Now, the issue with this, well, there's 2 issues. One, it's very heavy. So if you don't have a lot of arm strength or upper body strength, or if you are using it a lot, you might get a little elbow tendonitis, and that can be a problem. The other issue that can happen is worms can get stuck in the screen. If you want to get the worms out of the screen, put it under a good light, and they'll try to fall away through the screen to get away from that light source. So to do this sifter method, you again take your worm bin material, worms, brown material and all, and you put that on that screen. Now, if you walk away right now, those worms are going to get stuck in that screen. But if you quickly shake, just like that, or even slightly do that, then you get the large pieces of material and the worms, and you're able to dump it all into a new worm bin. Okay, so we only got 1 worm stuck, so I think that's pretty good. We'll put that guy back right there, and he'll get away from there. Okay, so real quickly, to make sure that you have your new worm bin ready to go, you are going to want to have at least 2 or 3 inches of good organic compost on the bottom of that bin. You've put your worms right there. You might want to put a handful of food on top of that compost. for the worms to eat. And you're going to finish with a good amount of newspaper that you should dunk and squeeze and get a little moisture in there and put that on top of the bin. So this is the best 3 ways I have found in 10 years to harvest worms if you're a home worm composter. We teach this and many other classes. If you'll look at our website, we have a class, How to Compost with Worms, coming up. Our website is www.txwormranch.com, and I hope you'll take a look, order books, worms, or take a class from us, and we'll be happy to teach you many other things. This is Heather Rinaldi from Texas Worm Ranch. Thank you for talking with us today.
Video was better on that video than mine was here. And we're going right back to this. So in short, I use 3 different methods. The light method, the sifter method, we recommend harvest 8 to 14 weeks, and we showed you how to add new material to the bin. Now let's talk for 1 second about population control. People are worried that they will have too many worms, and that will never be the case. Worms stop reproducing when they meet their population density for that bin. So after a couple of times of harvesting, you can say, hey, 1 worm bin does great, and I'm just going to keep it there, and they'll not lay cocoons anymore. Or you can start a new worm bin, and they'll both start laying cocoons, which is how they populate themselves. All right, quickly moving on. You want to pull it into a ball, but then be able to crumble it away. So you would never want it so wet that it would bounce back. What does it smell like? Both your worm bin and your vermicompost should always have a nice forest floor aroma. There should never be any off smells like ammonia or smell. That's an indication that things are too wet, not enough oxygen, and too much food waste. What does it taste like? I don't know. However, when you use it on your vegetables and your fruits out in your garden ecosystem, vegetables and fruits in healthy, fertile soil. You want to make sure it's making an impact, keeping your plant, and does it have the microbes you need? If you know how to look under the microscope and identify those families, then you would want to do that. So that's how you know if you have a quality vermicompost. So how do we use that vermicompost? How do we store it? If you aren't going to use it immediately, then you need to maintain the oxygen level of that vermicompost so those microbes will stay alive. You want to make sure that they're slightly moist, that they're not dried out, or you're going to lose that microbial life. Finally, I don't like using pure worm casting. I don't think that you can find those, but if there is not some carbon or don't want to see manure or food waste left over at the end of that vermicomposting cycle. Only the carbon material. And then finally, security. You vermicompost because that can impact the microbial life too. Remember when I told you to always have mulch or taller grass in your soil? Well, same holds true in your vermicompost. You have to protect it from light, and you have to protect it from extreme temperatures. All right, moving right along. Troubleshooting. A healthy ecosystem has more than one organism. So if you have some other decomposing critters in there, like earwigs or roly-poly, don't freak out. Even little mites, those are just decomposing woody material, and it is an indication that you're going to have really good vermicompost. So don't freak out about that. And we're not wanting fruit flies or fungus gnats, but if you're only feeding a gnat, less of food every 4 days is going to keep you from having hot compost or off gassing, and it's going to keep you from having fungus gnats. Remember how, and that will help all of those issues. If you have escaping worms, you likely have incorrect moisture, or you've overfed and you rarely have a smell. The only time you would have a smell is, again, if it's anaerobic, which means you have too much water or too much food. Heat is the same thing, too much moisture or too much food. At the end of your process, and it's hard to separate your worms from the compost, put everything in a very sturdy cardboard box. All right, moving on, we're almost done. How do I use this vermicompost? When I put seeds in, with a light coating of vermicompost. If I were to put a transplant in, like right now, you could put in pepper plants or your fall tomato plants. So you put your plant and then tamp that plant in for good soil contact. For mature plants, yesterday, and I was watching the radar and saw that that was coming on. So I ran outside and put castings underneath the mulch of my garden bed so that that would boost the health of my producing plants like tomatoes. I have a foliar product called Worm Wine that we sell on Fridays and Saturdays during our hours at the Worm Ranch. And if I have a large ecosystem or a tree, then I would spray that worm wine on that. We're not going to teach anyone how to do that today. If we have vermicompost as part of that soil mix, you really should not use 100% of your vermicompost in that mix. It isn't necessarily that plants or plants that aren't producing that well. But 10 to 20%, you're going to boost your root size. All right, and I think we have the next slide that shows some visuals of that. So here's on the left a winter crop where I put vermicompost on the surface just as a and the great health that we see when we use worm castings at 10 to 20%. All right, and finally, back to if you want to learn more about worm composting, about soil health, soil microbiology, composting, or organic gardening, especially here in the Dallas area, you can check out our webpage, email me, or go to Texas Worm Ranch on Facebook. All right, and so I think we're ready to answer questions, and hopefully people can hear me now.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Heather. We have some questions, and also I'm going to ask you to repeat a few things because just for some clarification, okay?
Okay.
So I can tell you when I first when I first convinced my husband that I wanted to have vermicomposting, he would not allow me to have worms in the house because I told him I have this perfect spot in my kitchen. I have a pretty large kitchen with side counters, and I had this counter I was going to tuck it in underneath my cabinet, right? And he was just, no, absolutely not. So we made the bin and we put it outside under the shade of our house. Well, just like you said, it became the biggest fire ant mound in the neighborhood.
Exactly.
So that was a huge heartbreak for me because, you know, I lost my worms and all this sort of stuff. But after that, my husband understood. And so we actually have ours in our kitchen, not near the stove or anything like that. And it's really handy because we can just walk over there, open the lid, and toss in food scraps whenever we need to. And we've never had a problem with the heat or anything like that. So some of the questions kind of, people are still unsure about making that commitment to putting worms inside their home. So I can tell you that I actually have 2 worm bins inside my house, and this blue one behind me is actually one of them. And so I have no problem with them in my house or even being close to me or anything like that. So I can attest to what Heather said about some of the problems and how they can be solved. And Heather, can you please go over the part about how to deal with fruit flies or fungus gnats?
Yeah. Basically, the best way to deal with fungus gnats is not to overfeed your bin. Remember, the worms are eating not just the food waste, but they're also eating everything in that bin. They can even digest the Dallas Morning News, which is what I do at breakfast sometimes. That's a worm joke. Overfeeding is where those fungus gnats lay their eggs. So even your fruit that you bring in from the grocery store likely has larvae on it. But if you can chop your food, you can even freeze your food, and that will kill the larvae. And only feed what is gone, decomposed in 3 to 4 days, because that's a hatching cycle for those fungus gnats. So beat that, use plenty of carbon on top of that food waste in the form of paper, cardboard, or leaves, and that is how you avoid having fungus gnats.
You know, that's a really good tip because I can tell you in my enthusiasm, I have put things like the stalks of zucchini, you know, the really thick, hard, almost like a tree branch, you know, some really thick, hard things. And I can tell you when it comes time to harvest, those things are still there. And so you're right about chopping things up small. Freezing is a fantastic tip. You had mentioned that it's not uncommon to have other organisms inside your worm bin because they're all doing the same thing. They're all decomposing. So I do open mine, and sometimes I just look in there. You know, I just want to see what's going on, or I want to check the food level, right, to see if that giant stalk of celery that I put in that I should have chopped is still there. And I do see other things, and at first it was a little, you know, maybe a little surprising. But just like you said, you know, they make a little happy home in there. And, you know, with that newspaper layer on top, they stay in there. And so I don't really have to worry about it.
So the way to describe that is if organisms are happy in their habitat, in their ecosystem, they will stay in their ecosystem. And if you have a closed bin, like the Rubbermaid tote or the, you know, the urban worm bag, any of those in your home, you are not likely to create cockroach habitat in those bins. You know, they're coming in from outside. They're not coming in because of the worms. They're just looking for a home. So use some organic products on the outside of your house, and you will not have cockroaches in your bin. But you may have other organisms that are just decomposers, and they actually improve the quality, the microbiology of your worm casting, your worm compost.
All right. So, what are some ideal locations in a home where you can keep your worm bin? Because the garage might get a little too hot, right?
Most Texas garages get too hot. So laundry room is a great place. A guest bathroom or guest bedroom are great places. If you have an out-of-the-way spot in your kitchen, of course you can use that, and that makes it easy to do. So I've had people who even had it underneath their bed. I don't know if I want to get that intimate with worms, but I'm telling you, they don't smell unless you overfeed or overwater, and they are just quiet, unobtrusive, wonderful additions to your family.
I agree 100%. I have had my worms for a long time. So I actually have, my larger one is I have like a fish aquarium, and I painted all the sides black. And then I made that into my worm bin, and I just use it's basically like a board. It's an extra piece of wood, and I put that on top, and it's not like the worms can lift it off, but it's easy for me to pick it up and add stuff to it and everything. And so
Yep.
I had a question about, someone's kind of interested in my little bin here. And while I'm getting that, Heather, I heard that you have a new location and that you're actually going to have a worm composting class soon. Could you share that information?
Yes. So we just moved to a new location. We moved from Garland to East Dallas, and Google has not updated that address yet. So please do not go to the Google address. But we are basically just east of Garland Road and a little bit north of Peavy. And if you're going to come visit us to pick up product, make sure and email, and we'll give you specific directions on how to get here so you don't get lost. So there's that. On Friday, we're supposed to have our first Zoom worm composting class, and we're going to have to figure out our internet issues. I love paying a lot of money for internet, and it's not working correctly for this class. It's so disappointing. But we'll hope to get all those worked out before then. We thought we'd be a good today, but here we are.
Well, that's okay, because you still shared a lot of valuable information with us. And so I have to preface this one. So yeah, I do environmental education, and I take this worm bin with me sometimes to go visit children. So this is not necessarily, this bin doesn't follow Heather's instructions to the T, because I didn't drill holes in it, because that means my worms would escape in the car. Okay, so now I did use a plastic container, right? And normally you would have holes drilled all over it, just like Heather said. All right. And then I actually watched your videos that you shared today, because they're on your website. So I actually watched those when I made this one. So when I told you I have an aquarium. So when it came time to separate my worms out, because they were so happy, they multiplied. So I actually have like the newspaper and everything that Heather talked about, right? And I have some big pieces of, see, now I know to chop up my food a little bit smaller, but I have some big pieces in here that you might be able to see. There's like an apple right here and stuff, and some, I do have some leaves in here. I have the wet newspaper. This is an old banana peel right in here. But I can see some little mites in here crawling around, like Heather said, they're in there to eat the wood and stuff. But you can see when I opened it, nothing like flew out. Nothing like crawled out, nothing escaped and stuff, because they're hopefully happy in here. And I don't smell anything. And sometimes what I do to help with the moisture level, because it doesn't have the holes in it, is I actually crack the lid. I actually will have the lid kind of off center to help the moisture come out of it, because I don't have all of the air holes. But like I said, this one's not designed like per what Heather suggested, because it's made for a different purpose. But this is one that I've had for, I'd say I've had this at least 6 months, if not longer. and I haven't had any issues with it.
Okay. Yeah, and then tip to maintaining your moisture is to also, if you get too wet, add dry paper or dry cardboard to your bin. And that will help absorb some of that moisture and keep things aerobic in that system. All right, what other questions do we have?
Okay, we're almost at time. So you mentioned something about if your vermicompost is too wet, you can use a cardboard box. Could you explain that just a little bit?
Yeah, so if you are trying to harvest your vermicompost and you've overfed or not managed your water, then you're going to have or you've waited too long to harvest, you're going to have a really hard time separating those castings from the worms. So take all of that brown material underneath the newspaper and put all of that in a sturdy cardboard box. Put several sheets of cardboard or paper on top, close up the box and wait a week or two, and the moisture will be absorbed by the cardboard and the paper, and you'll have fluffier vermicompost and be able to separate the worms from the castings easier.
That's
And
a great tip.
yeah, pine shavings aren't the best because those aromas that are there can kind of be off-putting for worms and microbes. Cedar is the same, so I would probably avoid those. They'll work. It's just, you know, really the paper, cardboard, and leaves, fall leaves are going to be your best bet. And you want to always maintain that layer at 3 to 6 inches at least on top of your other layers.
All right, so let's. This was going to be our last question, then we're going to have to wrap up. So someone asked, could you use cardboard instead of newspaper?
Yes, absolutely. And the last question someone asks if you can ship, it is too hot right now. You are going to have to find someone local to get worms from. There's also a global worm shortage right now because of COVID. Everybody at home decided they wanted to be a worm composter. And so it's become a very popular project, and it's really hard to get worms right now. So that's another reason we ask, please email us ahead of time so we will have time to put you in the order queue and get you your worms. We don't just have them sitting around outside of their habitat.
Okay. All right, Heather. Well, thank you so very, very much. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know moving, let alone moving your business, is not easy to do, and you just completed that a few days ago. So everybody remember, you can visit Heather at her website, on her Facebook page. She's having that class coming up soon. And speaking of classes, our next Grow With Us class will be the Monday after the 4th of July. So 1 week from today, and it's going to be about mushrooms. So we have Texas Fungus, which is the largest mushroom farm in North Texas. One of their founders is going to be speaking to us about different culinary mushrooms. So you're going to get to see lots of different beautiful mushrooms and a little bit about how to use them and even tips for growing mushrooms at home. And in the chat, we have the registration link for that. So if you would like to join us, please sign up and we'll look for you then. So again, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. And everyone who registered will get a copy of this Zoom recording and also my PowerPoint. So if you ever need to reach out to me or my department, you can. So once again, thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. And Gal,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.